I am convinced that in the distant past, we were visited by a superior intelligence that came from the stars. This account is virtually universal across all cultures on Earth. They descended from the skies, shaped the land, created human beings, and built civilization. And they were not alone. They did it using cutting-edge, highly advanced technology, flying machines, weapons of destruction, genetic engineering, and the humans who witnessed these things had no words for what they saw. That's why they called them gods. And that's why they called their work divine. In this video, we'll walk together through a fascinating landscape and begin to uncover the technology of the gods. Since the first fires burned, eyes have turned upward, not just to count the stars, but to remember something. Something that came down, across deserts and jungles, high plateaus and buried cities. The same motifs whisper back. Beings that descend, voices that issue from untouchable objects, chariots that ride the wind, towers that scrape the edge of heaven. These are not stray tales told in shadow. They are carved in stone, sealed in scripture, and embedded in ritual, fragments of a pattern the world has not forgotten. What if those voices weren't speaking in riddles? What if they were describing what was seen through the lens of a limited vocabulary? Imagine hearing engines before your language has a word for combustion, seeing lenses before knowing glass, watching a descent from the clouds and reaching for the closest images. Wings, wheels, fire. In Egypt, the sun doesn't rise, it journeys. Ferried by divine vessels through day and night, with crews, maps, and hazards. Priests rendered the hours of darkness as a step-by-step itinerary, a voyage designed for repetition. Near the Great Pyramid rests a 43-meter cedar ship, precision-built. Not for water, but for memory. A ritual vessel, yes, but also a message. When the gods moved, they moved in vehicles. Across the sea, Sanskrit epics ignite with aerospace imagery. Royal crafts are stolen, piloted, retrieved. Weapons fall from the sky with heat that silences landscapes. Mainstream scholars call it metaphor. But some verses behave like field logs, systems described with sequences, deployment rules, and cautions. Ironically, it is the later technical rewrites that break under scrutiny. The older epics hold shape. The closer to origin, the more they read like specs. In Mesoamerica, temples mark the sky not with prayer, but with geometry. At Chichen Itza, on equinox afternoons, a serpent of sunlight coils down a staircase, a calendar encoded in architecture. It does not just mark time, it syncs stone to sun, cosmos to earth. Meanwhile, the Popol Vuh speaks of sky beings hovering over floodwaters, testing prototypes of humanity, not divine fiat, iteration. To the north, star calendars bind ritual to movement. In Hopi and Lakota traditions, the night is not empty, it is structured. Messengers come and go. Ceremony follows celestial cycles. When the sky shifts, life must respond. When the sky visits, everything changes. And in Mesopotamia, the tablets whisper protocol. A king rises on the back of an eagle to search for life extension. Storm gods wield command-driven weapons. Stones carry functions. Commands are issued as if to machines. Temples double as observatories and mission control. Myth is the surface. Underneath lies interface. These patterns resurface in the Hebrew texts. A voice speaks from an object lethal to the touch. A pillar of cloud by day, fire by night, guiding with geometric precision. Ezekiel sees a craft with wheels within wheels, rims of eyes, and a crystal dome above. Later theology softened the reports, but the reports themselves, unaltered, do not whisper prayer. They describe contact. Fragments accumulate, not metaphors of thunder, but memories of machines that made it. Not gods as dreams, but operators and systems. We kept the rituals but lost the manuals. This isn't about belief, it's about recurrence. Why do cultures an ocean apart tell of sky beings, flying platforms, weapons of light, and towers that bind the earth to the stars? Why do their texts default to specific details, measurements, materials, routings, interfaces, whenever the narrative brushes one of these devices? Why do the heavens, again and again, run like clocks? Compare Egypt's sun barges to Israel's pillar. Measure Sanskrit vimanas beside a hovering ruach, a wind with vector. Consider the ark, layered in conductive metals, fatal to touch, speaking from between two terminals. Was it a reliquary or a device? Ascend a step tower built to pierce the sky and ask, was it pride or protocol that drew fire? In Sumer, winds of fire melt stone. In Canaan, fire falls from heaven. Across cultures, visitors arrive, instruct, warn, and vanish. Not every claim survives testing, but some sharpen. The caution is symmetrical. Hoaxes are discarded, but orthodoxy is tested too. What remains is a text behaving like tech. If myth is memory, the sky is a storage drive, and we've forgotten how to read it. Maybe the first engineers wore crowns and rode sunships. Maybe the ancients weren't mystics, they were mission specialists. Maybe those towers weren't acts of arrogance, but access codes. From chariots of fire to stone-bound clocks, from sacred arcs to stormcraft, the pattern is hiding in plain sight. Follow the contrails, trace the procedures, and listen, not as myth, but as if reading a declassified manual, because the sky once spoke, and it may be speaking still. A cart shudders, a hand reaches out, just to steady it. And the man drops where he stands. He did not curse, he did not defy, he simply touched the box, and contact was fatal. Whatever the ark was, proximity mattered. Contact killed. Now examine the construction, not as myth, but as a build sheet. Acacia wood, hard, stable, rot-resistant. Gold overlay inside and out, a conductive shell over a non-conductive core. 4 rings, anchored, not decorative, mounted at the feet. Through them, 2 poles sheathed in gold, never removed. Human hands never meet the surface. At the top, a solid hammered gold cover, crowned by 2 cherubim, facing inward, wings extended to shield the meeting point. The repeated order, build it exactly according to the Tavnit, the pattern, not poetry, blueprint. And then the handling procedures, delivered like a safety manual, not a sermon. Before transport, the ark must be covered, veiled, wrapped, sealed. No one looks directly at it. A trained guild carries it, on shoulders, not hands. They touch the poles, never the body. Inside the sanctuary, when the high priest approaches, he floods the space with incense, forming a cloud over the top assembly, so that he will not die. Even his robe is rigged with bells, a moving heartbeat, warning of silence. The refrain is absolute. Do not touch, do not look, or die. Stack the incident reports and the pattern locks in. A man steadies the ark, dies on the spot. Villagers look inside, many die. The rest beg for it to be removed. Enemy priests place it in their temple. Next morning, their idol lies shattered, and the towns erupt in panic as tumors spread and the box is sent away. Later, under new command, the rules change. It is carried by poles, according to the instruction. Because the last attempt killed people. This is not religious awe, it is hazard protocol. Focus now on the top array. There I will meet with you, from above the cover, from between the cherubim. The point of communication is fixed, localized. The wings do not flap, they cover. In some texts, cherubim act as mobile platforms linked to flight. But here, They frame a precise interface, not ornament, but shielding, not metaphor, but function. The components begin to echo a deeper pattern. Acacia core between gold shells, dielectric sandwiched between conductors, a primitive capacitor. The poles isolate touch. The cloud disperses charge. Contact at the wrong time ends in death. If this is even close, the ark wasn't symbolic, it was energetic. A machine for power, signal, or both. And approached by the book, it became a terminal, not a trophy, a tool. And it was used. Leaders sought answers before the ark. The voice didn't come from the walls, it came from the space between the panels. And elsewhere, a companion device appears, the ephod, a garment, structured, worn by the operator, layered with stones. When deployed, it was used for questions, not prayer, but binary queries. Advance or wait, pursue or stand down, no altar, no offering, just direct feedback. If the ark was the central node, the ephod was a portable interface, a linked module for tactical response. Even cultural memory reflects the voltage. Some say it was hidden, stored in cloth, revealed only on holy days. No one argued conductivity. They obeyed distance and feared it, because in their reckoning, it still worked. The traditional view holds the ark was dangerous because it was holy, sacred power not to be violated. That deserves respect. But beside that view lay the specs, conductive sheathing, fixed interfaces, non-contact procedures, layer shielding, access control, directional communication. That is not theology, that is containment. Even the surrounding events behave like accident reports. Towns that host the ark suffer illness and panic. Leaders return it with offerings. A festive march turns to mourning when someone reaches instinctively and dies. From then on, everything changes. The king himself says, "How can this ark come to me?" and diverts it to a safer location. That is not mysticism, that is mitigation, and there is more. The ark does not only react, it commands. When it moves, we move. It goes before you. In battles, its presence shifts morale. Outcomes turn. Was it a weapon, a command relay, a force amplifier? The text never calls it one, but it behaves like one. Was this the hub of a larger network? Lost devices, forgotten procedures, operators remembered as priests? Was this the center node, projecting coordination, delivering response? The schematic cannot be confirmed, but the language holds. A gold-clad chest, forbidden to touch, layered for shielding, approached through smoke, accessed only at a targeted point between shielding panels. This is not how mythic relics are handled. It is how live hardware is handled. So the question does not fade, it sharpens. Was the Ark of the Covenant a transmitter, a capacitor, a power core, maybe all three, an engineered object capable of storing charge, delivering command, and if misused, unleashing death? And if such a machine once crossed deserts, rested in tents, turned wars, and vanished into secrecy, then perhaps the oldest legend of a golden box is not a tale of glory. It's the user manual we forgot how to read. Moses came down from the mountain, and the people stepped back, not in reverence, but in fear. His face shone, not as a metaphor, not as a symbol of joy or divine favor, but with a radiance so palpable it forced others to keep their distance. It wasn't a one-time miracle. It happened every time. The text outlines the sequence like a repeatable protocol. After contact with the presence, Moses' skin glowed. The community waited until he called them. He wore a veil when among them and removed it only when returning to the interface point. Exposure, shielding, return, repeated again and again. This isn't poetry. It's a controlled procedure. That pattern begins not with radiance, but with the request. Moses asks to see the Kavod, the presence. What follows is choreographed with surgical care. He's positioned in a rock cleft. A covering is placed over him. The presence passes by, and only then is exposure permitted, limited, measured, temporary. Around that moment stretches a wider safety regime. At Sinai, the people are warned not to touch the mountain during the event. Breach the perimeter, and death follows. Later, when the Kavod descends into the camp, no one moves forward. A pillar of cloud by day and fire by night signals its arrival. Households stand at their thresholds and watch. The people don't rush in, they freeze. The behavior of the crowd mirrors the character of the thing: brilliant, thunderous, and dangerous, and always controlled by distance. That danger becomes unmistakable in the report of Ezekiel. He doesn't describe a mystical glow or a vague aura. He describes weather. A storm front arrives from the north. A cloud billows with fire folding back on itself. Metal and crystal gleam with blinding intensity. And then the sound, a roar like rushing waters, like wide-band noise rolling outward from a massive engine. The description doesn't fade into dream logic. It solidifies. Ezekiel lists parts: wings that lift the platform, wheels within wheels that enable omnidirectional movement, rims filled with eyes, not ornaments but apertures, sensors, points of awareness. Above it all, a solid expanse like a vault, and atop that, a throne-like structure, mobility below, command space above. The motion is deliberate and coded. It rises, descends, hovers, strafes, and glides without turning. It starts only when signaled. When the signal stops, it halts. Every part responds in sync. There's no spontaneity, only synchronization. In modern terms, it behaves like a vertical takeoff and landing craft with omnidirectional translation and distributed sensory input. And the language describing it isn't symbolic fog. It reads like an engineer's log rendered in Bronze Age vocabulary. Even the word Kavod betrays its real nature. Translated later as glory, its root meaning in Hebrew is weight, mass, density, what bears down, and the behavior fits. The Kavod descends into space, rests on structures, leaves zones hot and trembling, and blinds those who stand too close. The ancients didn't tiptoe around it in mystery. They enforced boundaries. They built procedures. Those procedures form the outline of hazard control. Clear perimeters at Sinai, where contact during active phase is fatal. Cloud and smoke used as visual shielding over the core of the event, even the priest's robe fitted with bells, so movement within the danger zone can be tracked in real time. If the bells stop, he's presumed down. The people ask for distance. They delegate interaction. One speaks, the rest observe from afar. The technical behavior doesn't stop there. The wheel-within-wheel design solves a known mobility problem: how to translate in multiple directions without rotating the main structure. Modern engineers replicate this with mechanism wheels, multi-roller configurations that allow for strafing, diagonal glide, or pivot-in-place movement. In the late 20th century, a NASA engineer even used Ezekiel's description to prototype such a wheel. You don't need to believe in an Ezekiel craft to acknowledge this. His motion report aligns with real-world mechanical solutions. The interaction leaves its mark. Moses' radiance, often misunderstood as horns in medieval art, is more accurately a form of projected energy. He removes the veil when entering the interface zone, but recovers when among the people. The veil protects them, not him. In combination with Sinai's perimeter and the camp's stillness at the tent, the entire narrative illustrates a visual grammar of exposure management. Mark the danger zone, obscure the source, time the encounter, shield those nearby. And the Kavod doesn't operate in isolation. It commands. When the pillar lifts, the entire camp mobilizes. When it rests, they stop. This is not mysticism, it's convoy logic. A population waits for signal input from a mobile node. command is centralized, location-specific. The interaction point is fixed, above a gold-lined panel between twin elements, never fluid, never interpretive. In moments of full presence, even authorized personnel are locked out. No entry. The object enforces its own access control. Symbolism will always have its place, and many traditions interpret these scenes as visions of divine majesty or cosmic order. But symbolism tends to generalize. What these texts preserve are constraints. They specify boundaries, timing, shielding, order of operations. They preserve behaviors, and that is the footprint of machinery. The sensory report seals it. Ezekiel's roar, like many waters, matches the experience of standing near massive thrust, a deafening, disorienting, wide-spectrum noise field. The light is not gentle. It burns, reflects, folds into itself like plasma. Heat and brightness saturate the space. The text doesn't explain it metaphorically. It just tells you how it felt. When all of this is aligned, the radiance, the sound, the shielding, the motion, the convoy, the rules, the narrative locks into place. This was not ambiance. It was operation. If the Kavod was only a symbol, it was the most mechanized symbol the ancient world ever produced. If it was a craft, then the awe makes perfect sense. It descended with noise and brilliance, signaled motion, issued commands, and left radiation behind. In that light, Moses' veil becomes a protocol. Sinai's boundary becomes a safety radius. The tent of meeting becomes a standoff zone. Ezekiel's wheels become a design solution. And glory becomes something that doesn't just shine. It lands, operates, and leaves. Which leads to one radical but consistent conclusion. The Kavod may have been a vehicle, a transport for those known as the Elohim, capable of vertical descent, self-generated shielding, crowd deterrence through heat and noise, fixed point communication, command over movement, and sudden withdrawal. A thing that bore weight, made sound, left burn, and reordered a nomadic nation's movement with every rise and fall. What later eras called glory, what prophets called presence, may have been, at its core, a craft. And what the ancients feared may have once touched down among them. Before there were continents, before there were kings or cities, there was only water and something above it. The Hebrew compresses the scene into a single line, dense and deliberate. Ruach Elohim merachefet al penei hamayim. A ruach hovering over the face of the waters. Tradition renders this as the Spirit of God, but the word ruach is broader, harder, more functional. It means spirit, yes, but also wind, breath, force in motion. And the verb merachefet is not passive. It's used elsewhere to describe an eagle hovering, steady, intent, riding the air with precision, not floating, station keeping. Read that way, Genesis 1:2 ceases to sound like stained glass theology and begins to read like the opening phase of an operation. The world is flood-covered, formless, chaotic. The first move is not an instant act of creation, it is stabilization. A hovering force takes position over the waters, it moves air, it holds, it shapes, it waits. The ancients didn't have a word for drone or for atmospheric surveyor. They had ruach. This isn't the only time the word behaves like a mechanism. At the sea crossing, a strong east ruach works all night to drive back water and expose ground. Not magic, force applied over time. In the wilderness, ruach delivers flocks of quail across desert airspace. Not metaphor, directed movement, wind leveraged for logistics. In Ezekiel's vision, a command summons the four ruachim, winds from all directions, to converge and reanimate bodies. Even in the poetic frame, the verbs point to operation. Elsewhere, a ruach shatters rock on a mountain, energy delivered with impact. And sometimes, ruach carries people. Ezekiel says it plainly. The Ruach lifted me up and brought me, once to a gate, once to Chaldea. Coordinates in, movement out, no trance, transport. Most striking is Elijah's departure. Disciples whisper in each town, "This is the day." He moves toward a known location. At the river, a burst of fire intervenes. The ascent comes by whirlwind, se'ara, a spiral force in the air. His companion watches, but others respond physically. They organize a 3-day ground search across mountains and valleys. That's not symbolic grief. That's an extraction scenario. This pattern repeats in other cultures. The Popol Vuh begins with flood and darkness. Above the water, heart of sky and plumed serpent confer, hovering. In Philippine myth, a hawk or kite flutters in the tight space between water and low sky, forcing them apart. In Babylon's Enuma Elish, a high god deploys a suite of named winds, cardinal, whirlwind, even evil wind, to subdue chaos. Different names, same choreography, air used as a shaping tool. Even the grammar in Genesis resists mystification. The participle merashephe is feminine singular, matching ruach. The verb implies continuous motion, was hovering, not once hovered. Ancient commentary leans toward bird analogies. Modern translators split. Spirit of God, mighty wind, wind from God. That split isn't a flaw, it's a signal. Ruach refuses to flatten. Its root is movement. The text gives it agency. Later theology cloaked it in presence. The earlier usage shows it doing work. And the work is mechanical. Hovering over water without disturbing it suggests a platform stable in altitude, minimizing turbulence. The sea crossing scene adds directionality and duration, an engineered flow held through the night. Wilderness logistics show aerial herding, quail steered into camp via pressure gradients. Ezekiel describes lift vectors that relocate him. And Elijah's ascent? A bright barrier, then a vertical spiral. Today we'd call that a thermal column, a rotor boundary, a controlled vortex. Ruach also behaves with modular intent. In Hebrew, it refers to breath, wind, storm, whirlwind, natural terms, but also trackable phenomena. In Ezekiel, the Ruach that precedes the throne craft is thunderous. It arrives like storm from the north. It carries the roar of many waters, a wide-band sound profile consistent with engines or high-energy atmospheric push. The noise precedes the visual. The effect precedes the theology. The story of beginnings then becomes something else. Genesis isn't a snap creation myth. It's a reordering. First a force hovers, then light is separated from dark, waters from waters, dry land emerges. Not instant, staged, as if terraforming had phases. The first tool deployed is Ruach. This same system undergirds the Exodus. A pillar of cloud by day and fire by night leads the people. It moves, rests, repositions. It stands between them and enemies. It descends to the tent and signals presence. In parallel, a Ruach opens the sea overnight. Another drives food into camp. Atmospheric phenomena behaving with timing, precision, and protective logic. Not storybook miracles, systems at work. And there's a pattern behind the words. In Ezekiel, the 4 Ruachim function as quadrant control, air from every direction summoned on command. In Babylon, the god unleashes directional winds with tactical purpose. When multiple traditions remember wind deployed like a suite of tools, each with mode, vector, and function, it's not coincidence. It's data with metaphor layered on top. To be clear, none of this erases spirit, but it does return us to the text before the gloss. Ruach moves, shapes, lifts, delivers. It acts in the physical world with measurable consequence. When the Bible uses the term, it often describes things that generate awe because they generate change. The veil Moses wears after encountering the presence. The strict boundaries at Sinai. the standoff posture when the pillar descends. These are not liturgical cues, they are safety protocols. So what was Ruach? A word for breath, for wind, for a device that breathes, lifting, hovering, acting on the world. Perhaps even a class of machine, quiet when needed, thunderous when active, able to move air with force and guide a people with presence. Something ancient cultures watched and named in their own terms. A presence that leaves no footprints, but leaves behind fear. Maybe the real question isn't what Ruach means. It's who used it and why the sky itself remembers. Dust lifts from the plain as kilns roar and crews pass mold after mold, clay-pressed, sun-baked, and fired to hardness. The rhythm is steady, coordinated. Foremen chant commands in a single tongue, and the workers respond in unison. No translators, no drift. One language, one project. A tower whose top is meant for the heavens. This is not myth wrapped in metaphor. It's mass and scale, bricks, bitumen, elevation. A man-made mountain taking form by design. Stepped platforms, ascending terraces, ramps wide enough for processions, a shrine planned for the summit. In Mesopotamia, such structures were not decorative, they were directional. Houses of the foundation of heaven and earth, anchored on the ground, aimed at the sky. Viewed from the base, the intent is unmistakable, not art, infrastructure. And then, a shift. The text records a decision from above. Come, let us go down. Not a single voice, but the speech of a council, a multi-agent response. The site is reviewed, the pace is noted, the assessment is blunt. If humans remain unified like this, nothing they plan will be impossible for them. It's not awe, it's apprehension. Mission creep, observed and flagged. But the countermeasure is not violence. No fire falls, no winds tear the tower down. Instead, something quieter and more catastrophic. The shared language collapses. The syntax of coordination dissolves. The crews remain, the bricks remain. The blueprints still sit in scribe houses, but the chain breaks. Brickmakers can't parse surveyors, riggers can't follow the masons, priests can't read the scribes. The build stops, not by force, but by misalignment. Tradition casts this as divine punishment for pride, but the verbs, the sequencing, the tactics suggest something else. This is airspace denial executed by disabling command and control. The object in question, a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, is not rhetorical. In the language of the region, this phrase signals sacred architecture, not skyscrapers. Ziggurats were platformed peaks, massive stepped terraces aligned to cardinal directions, crowned with a sanctuary. Their names encoded function, gates of the gods, bonds of sky and earth. Their forms today look almost schematic, broad bases, rising stages, massive ramps. Ideal for ceremony, ideal for equipment, ideal for launch. From above, the reaction is strategic. Let us go down and confuse their language. The plural is key. This is not the whim of a king, but the decision of a council. The tool chosen is surgical, no wreckage, just linguistic fragmentation. A broken nervous system in a city that ran on coordination. In modern terms, an interface kill switch. Even the chronology nods toward design. One chapter earlier, Genesis lists clans and territories by their languages. The multiplicity of tongues predates the tower, so Babel is not the origin of language, but the reassignment of fluency. A redistribution of roles that diffuses the project. Like pulling software engineers from a launch pad and replacing them with sculptors. No offense to the sculptors. This pattern is not unique to this tale. In neighboring myths, the same ceiling is lowered when human reach grows too long. A sage is granted wisdom but denied eternal life. A god restrains the spread of noise and industry. Fire, once stolen, costs the thief dearly. Eden closes when knowledge is touched, and guards are stationed with burning weapons. Babel fits the template. Ascent triggers interruption. Heaven enforces its altitudes. Builders knew what they were doing. Ziggurats were not folklore. They were engineered objects, aligned, specified, repeatable. Names reflected intention. Dur-Anki, the bond of heaven and earth. Inscriptions boast of tops raised to the skies. Temples tracked lunar paths. Terraces supported ritual cycles. Bricks were molded to measurement, bound with bitumen, and placed with care. The divine and the technical weren't separate. They were integrated. So when the divine response comes, it doesn't break the bricks, it breaks the protocol. Nothing will be impossible for them is not a hymn to human potential. It's a risk forecast. The fear is not arrogance, it's capability. Infrastructure reaching into lanes once reserved for others. If the heavens operate on corridors, if travel between sky and ground has form, then a platformed tower with a summit gate is more than symbol. It's a challenge. Some readings go deeper. If ziggurats once formed a network, each city a node, each terrace a signal point, then Babel is not merely a tower. It is a hijack, one city trying to centralize access, to move mission control, to claim a sky link once shared. Whether or not that reading convinces, the architectural record agrees. These builds thought vertically. They sought contact, ladders, gates, bonds, not allegories, interfaces. So why stop it? Maybe it was for protection. Accessing the sky might carry hazards, plume, noise, radiation, structural failure, or perhaps it was about status, gatekeeping. Once humans can schedule descent or ascent, the monopoly ends. The text is neutral on motive, but the outcome is consistent. Deplatforming, dispersion, delay. And dispersion is the weapon, not destruction, but diffusion. The city loses its role as hub. The builders become migrants. Expertise fragments. Momentum disintegrates. The tower doesn't fall, it just pauses. Unfinished, but still standing. A monument to halted reach. Even the name carries irony. Babylon once meant gate of the gods. The biblical writer inverts it. Babel, confusion. Same syllables, different meaning. The structure meant as a bridge becomes a bottleneck. So what, finally, was Babel? Imagine the ziggurat at Ur scaled even larger. Terraces stacked high, ramps broad and deliberate, a shrine at the top, and below it all, a city machine. Kilns, storerooms, records, survey lines. This wasn't vanity, it was a coordinated reach. The power didn't lie in the height, it lay in the harmony. The response is surgical. No crater, no flood, just a silent command. Fracture their language, pull the translators, change the standards, let the bricks remain, but break the chant. Elsewhere in the memory of humanity, the same logic recurs. Guards at the gate, fire hidden, ascent resisted, innovation allowed but managed, ambition delayed, not destroyed. The code is clear, maintain the boundary. But for the engineer, Babel doesn't fade as a fable. It lingers as a blueprint. Fired clay bound with bitumen, a city shaped around elevation, ramps wide enough for movement, structured enough for ceremony or payload. A build paused by an interface kill, not a firestorm, and the question left behind, humming like static in a dead channel. What was being built that made the sky nervous? A stairway, a docking port, a meeting place to summon what once descended, not by omen, but by schedule? Stand again at the foot of the half-finished tower. Bricks stacked, crews scattered, the air still. The silence not one of failure, but of interruption. The build may sleep, the ambition does not. Babel wasn't the end, it was the first denied launch. The first red light on a pad that nearly lit. First came the council, not a human one, but theirs. A deliberation unseen, a decision reached, and then orders issued. What follows rides the wind. The oldest tablets do not veil it in metaphor. They document it with unnerving precision. A front of searing heat preceding a storm, darkness at midday, air stripped of breath, and then the arrival of an evil wind that sweeps through the streets day after day until life abandons the city. The scribes of Sumer were not imagining these scenes for dramatic effect. They were recording consequences. The pattern repeats across Mesopotamian records. In the epics and laments, the sky powers don't simply appear, they prepare. Arrays of named forces are assembled: the whirlwind, the baneful wind, the cutting wind. Storm chariots descend, nets are deployed, thunderbolts are activated. Elsewhere, the war god musters his elite seven, retracts divine guardianship from cities, and issues the strike order. The result is not mere devastation, it is eradication. Streets emptied, storehouses blackened, survivors stunned or incoherent. Another text outlines a hierarchy of punishment: plague, then drought, then famine. And if none of these bend human will, the final option is flood. These are not the tools of myth, they are scalable systems: environmental, aerial, and overwhelming. The ancients remembered effects that exceeded siegecraft. They remembered city killers. The language is clinical. The wind returned daily. The people gasped for breath. Heat blazed before the storm. Clay seals and city laments function like field manuals. Symptoms are listed, timelines logged. A thermal front rolls in. Choking aerosols linger. The wind does not relent. Afterward, the terrain is changed. Gates are scorched, soils corrupted, entire zones left infertile. One account notes a city flattened in an instant. Another speaks of land poisoned and rendered barren. These are not metaphors for conquest. They are aftermaths of events that moved too fast, too hot, and too high to be the work of battering rams. This isn't just in the texts. Archaeology speaks with equal weight. In northern Britain, ramparts of ancient hill forts are vitrified. Stone melted into slag by temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. Under specific conditions, fire inside timber-laced walls could create such heat. No beam from above is required, but the visual remains: stone fused by sudden, directed thermal force. In the Sahara, translucent yellow-green desert glass, Libyan glass, contains shocked zircon, a signature of exposure to temperatures above 2,000 degrees Celsius and immense pressure. The kind of event that could result from an airburst or cosmic impact. Elsewhere, in Arabia's empty quarter, relatively young craters sit among fields of dark, frothy glass, sand flash-melted by incoming iron. In India's Lonar crater, impact has turned basalt into glass. None of this proves that gods once deployed weapons, but all of it proves what the sky can do. Into this gallery of violence walks the biblical account of Sodom and Gomorrah. The narrative is minimalist, almost indifferent to embellishment. Fire and sulfur descend from the heavens. The cities, their plain, their vegetation, all overturned. From a distant ridge, Abraham watches the aftermath, a column of smoke rising like a furnace. The description is unmistakable: a short-duration, high-temperature aerial event. The addition of salt is not ornamental. This is the Dead Sea Basin, rich in evaporites. A violent, hot dispersal through such deposits would leave a residue sharp on the tongue and hostile to the lungs. Later generations turned it into allegory. The original narrative leaves the mechanics bare. The question that haunts these stories is not whether the events occurred, but what kind of instruments caused them. One answer is cosmic. The Earth has been struck before. The Tunguska event flattened forests with no impact crater, only an airburst, an incoming body exploding mid-sky, radiating heat and pressure outward. The symptoms are familiar: sudden thermal ignition, shock waves, vertical plumes, persistent environmental disruption. Similar evidence appears across continents. Arabia's glass fields, Indian crater melt, Sahara's shocked minerals, all show that air and sky can end worlds. This path is scientific and solid, but it's not the only one. The other path is memory, technological memory, misfiled in myth. Read the Mesopotamian records not as magic, but as protocol. The winds are not poetic abstractions. They're system outputs, effects delivered in coordinated deployment. The net is a containment field or signal array. The chariot is a platform, an arrival vehicle that changes weather or air composition. The seven are specialists, or modules, or warheads. When protection is withdrawn from a city, it isn't metaphysical, it's procedural. The guardians step back. The shield comes down, then the strike is authorized. In this frame, the evil wind becomes fallout. Not radiation as we define it, no isotopes remain to confirm it, but the principle survives. Something invisible, choking, lingering. An area rendered uninhabitable not by visible fire, but by the residue that follows. If this was technology, the texts record not the devices, but the doctrines. Deploy from altitude, precede the strike with heat, follow with sustained atmospheric hazard, effects before machines. The distinction between these two paths, cosmic and technological, may not matter. What matters is what they describe in common: rapid heat, sudden wind, melting surfaces, persistent danger. Both the memory and the physics align. Some of the earliest written traditions frame the divine as operating within rules. When humans become noisy, interpreted by many scholars not as literal sound but as productive, organized, industrial, the chief power reviews the escalation ladder. First, soft pressure, disease, drought, famine. Then, the reset, flood. Others speak of what happens when presence is withdrawn, when the being who keeps a city intact departs. Without that shield, the strike arrives. It's not wrath, it's posture, a logic of deterrence and failure to comply. The Hebrew canon keeps this logic on a smaller scale. The Ruach moves quail or clears a sea, but also shatters stone. The Kavod lifts, descends, blinds, and burns. When it is active, procedures protect the people. When it departs, cities fall. This is not mysticism. It is systems discipline. Signal on, access allowed. Signal off, exposure fatal. Return to the laments. They do not describe the cause. They describe the result. Heat arrives, breath fails, a wind follows. And after it, days of return, and nothing is the same. Add to this the archaeological layer. Glass, vitrification, blast geometry, and the ancient reports stop looking poetic. They begin to look procedural. The sky is not just a backdrop, it is a channel. To be clear, popular legends of ancient nukes in South Asia, glowing bones, radioactive ruins, do not survive academic scrutiny. These are internet myths, not field data. Skepticism is not cynicism, it is discipline. The aim is not to trade one fantasy for another. It is to notice when ancient observers describe phenomena in terms still legible today, if we're willing to take their words as operational, not ornamental. So what then were the weapons of the gods? The texts suggest a doctrine. Councils deliberate, select tools, remove protections, and unleash force. The effects appear in the archaeological record: vitrified surfaces, instant destruction, long-term ecological trauma. The motif repeats, from Sumer to the Hebrew scriptures to Greek myth, a pattern in which human ascent toward centralization, immortality, or forbidden knowledge is met with a ceiling imposed not gently, but with violence. And the images remain, a witness standing at dawn, the city below still half asleep, furnaces glowing, markets preparing to open, livestock restless in the pre-morning hush. Then, something shifts. Not light from the sun, but a breathless heat, arriving sideways. Animals react before people. A sound rises, not thunder, not trumpet, but pressure. And in the sky, something climbs. Vertical, blinding, sharp against the clouds, a furnace in the air. In the days that follow, The wind returns. No one leaves their homes. In weeks, nothing grows. The fields taste of ash. The ancients did not romanticize this. They memorialized it. They carved it into clay, etched it into stone, not to glorify destruction, but to remember that such power exists and that it has been used. Today, the skies are filled with weapons again. Their names are known, their equations mastered. The old stories do not demand belief in monsters or magic. They ask only that we pay attention to precedent, to the patterns of escalation, to the fragility of safety, and to the quiet warning embedded in every ruined city. This happened before, and someone decided it would. Long before theology narrowed the heavens to a single voice, Israel's oldest memory spoke in the plural. The word Elohim, not a personal name but a category, appears in the earliest pages, and it does not describe solitude. A plurality acts, debates, commands, and sometimes contradicts itself. Let us make the human. The human has become like one of us. Come, let us go down and scatter. These are not slips. They are traces of a world where the sky is not a throne room for one, but a council chamber. That council surfaces in visions and poems. Thrones, attendants, messengers who volunteer for missions, and judgments delivered in open session. Not a singular decree from above, but governance, layered, deliberative, and at times contested. Ancient texts describe nations as having patrons, beings assigned to them by the Most High. One such being claims Israel as a personal inheritance. Other names fill the region's pantheon: Baal, Chemosh, Milcom. In Highland inscriptions, Yahweh is even paired with a consort, Yahweh and his Asherah, suggesting that early worship imagined the divine not as an abstract monolith, but as a household with members and relations. Over time, plurality became singularity, not through sudden revelation, but by historical process. Kings centralized worship in Jerusalem, purged local cults, stripped symbols from temples, and recast memory through the lens of national crisis. After exile, scribes revised the tradition. Gods became metaphors, rivals became errors, and heaven itself was rewritten as monarchy. Yet beneath the edits, older layers remain. Fossils in the text, council scenes, plural grammar, divine rivalries, refuse to be smoothed entirely. The Elohim function not as metaphors but as agents. They rule regions, champion tribes, prosecute wars. They give orders, grant victories, strike cities, or pull back protection. One lifts a shepherd from obscurity. Another authorizes a spirit to deceive a king. Sometimes sentence is declared and then overturned, after negotiation, after appeal. What emerges is not the logic of omnipotence, but of policy. Power balanced against mercy, wrath restrained by argument, bureaucracy, not tyranny. Judgment is not always final. It can be stayed, reversed, or suspended. This is not a theological abstraction. It is a description of a contested realm where decisions are made, sometimes badly. At the core of these contests is a single issue: knowledge. A vein of traditions, some canonical, others peripheral, recalls a boundary breached. Watchers descend, take wives, and teach. They bring metallurgy, weapons, makeup, enchantments, star charts, and calendars. The crime is not lust alone, it is instruction. Knowledge moves from sky to earth, and punishment follows. Chains, flood, banishment, ruin. Mesopotamia remembers the same theme with gentler tones. The Apkallu, sages sent from above, teach the first kings writing, medicine, divination, and agriculture. But even here, the rules are clear. The knowledge is powerful, and it must be guarded. From both streams, harsh and noble, the pattern emerges. Expertise descends, and with it, consequences. Ancient civilizations encoded these boundaries into architecture. Egypt's Per Ankh, the House of Life, housed sacred texts under priestly lock. In Mesopotamia, the Aduba trained scribes who alone could access and transmit state memory. Later, desert sects cached scrolls in caves. Egyptian communities sealed codices in jars and buried them beside the Nile. From temples to libraries to mountain vaults, knowledge was hidden, preserved, restricted. It was not just what you knew, it was who was allowed to know. Seen through that lens, the Elohim become more than celestial figures. They are gatekeepers. In Eden, the path to wisdom and immortality is blocked by swords of fire. At Babel, coordination and skill are punished not by annihilation, but by the deliberate confusion of language. The project is halted, not because it is evil, but because it works. A council sees too much progress and intervenes. Later, a reforming king demolishes sacred poles and cult objects. A scribe reshapes rival deities into shadows or monsters. A unified past is edited into a singular present. None of this demands rejection of the sacred. It demands listening to the text. The Elohim ride in craft that burn and thunder. They are carried by Ruach, wind force that lifts and reshapes. They dwell in Kavod, a presence that must be veiled lest it kill. They issue specifications for objects later declared holy, and their procedures are not liturgy. They are hazard protocols. When punished, the offense often concerns forbidden knowledge, tools or structures that close the distance between human and divine, between subject and operator. What became of these beings? Two answers contend. One says they withdrew. Their names remained, rituals echoed their memory, but the real contact ended. No more fire on the mountain, no more voice from the ark. Theology grew not from invention, but from absence. The other says they remained, but changed their methods. Where once a priesthood guarded sky ladders, now committees seal technologies. Where stars were once charted under oaths, now orbits are classified. The watchers never left. They became systems. They still gate. They still decide. Myths about hidden brotherhoods turn into whispered briefings and institutional walls. The names vary. The logic holds. Maintain control. Prevent assent. Permit only what is safe. Even for those who favor the first view, the textual resistance to singularity remains strong. The editorial hand cannot fully erase the room of voices. One prophet hears a question posed to a crowd: who will go for us? Another records a plan to deceive a ruler, approved by consensus. A psalm imagines God rebuking other gods for ruling unjustly, sentencing them to die as mortals. A hymn praises the stormbringer, but borrows language from older hymns to Baal. Proof that even worship is a merger, not an ex nihilo invention. A speech grants other nations their own gods, until a later hand amends the clause. And always the question returns: what kind of rulers are these? The same power that decrees destruction later pleads like a parent: how can I give you up? A city is condemned. A prophet argues. The sentence softens. A people betrays the covenant. A mediator stands in the breach. This is not cold will. It is contested decision-making. Not robotic law, but moral struggle. In that struggle, the stories of forbidden knowledge sharpen their edge. Sky beings bring instruction, then punishment follows. The world reorganizes around metal, stars, time, and spellcraft. Who controls the new knowledge controls the world. The rebellion is not just about desire, it's about infrastructure. Those who teach become threats. Those who learn become dangerous. The gods strike to reset the board. The logic has not changed. We live in a time of publication, but not all knowledge is shared. Data flows within walls. Discoveries emerge, with patents, permissions, and kill switches. Cross a certain line in encryption, propulsion, biology, and a letter arrives. The face of power has changed. Its behavior has not. In the ancient world, the gatekeepers stood in fire and cloud. In the medieval world, they sat in scriptoria and debated canons. Today, They write code, fund labs, oversee networks, redact release notes. But the core behavior repeats. Knowledge is conferred, curated, and withheld. And those who overreach, who climb too far, build too high, teach too freely, face the same quiet response: delay, dismantle, dispersion. The Elohim are not a metaphor for conspiracy. They are the oldest description of how control behaves when it sits above visibility. Whether in heaven or among us, the same principle applies. Knowledge enables power. Knowledge must be managed. Some say the council was always temporary, that history moves from divine plurality to ethical unity, from thrones to justice, from rule to reconciliation. In that reading, the many voices collapse into one voice calling for mercy, and all earlier gates exist only to prepare the way for wisdom shared freely. The investigation does not deny that hope. It insists only that we look again at what the oldest texts actually say. Let the Elohim stand, not as metaphors, but as entities. Let them disagree, let them restrain, let them punish, let them regret. Let their stories tell us what kind of beings watched us climb, and what they did when we climbed too far. And let us not lose the question that pulses in every forbidden text, every sealed archive, every scattered team left without a common language. If knowledge is a ladder, and heaven prefers it short, who holds it, and who decides how high we may go? If these were only Bible stories, theology could file them away and close the drawer. But they aren't. The same motifs rise across civilizations, different continents, different tongues, centuries apart. Skyborne vehicles, beings who descend and depart, objects that demand protocol, weapons described with an engineer's detachment, not a poet's flourish. Calendars aligned to stellar rhythms. The names change. The structure does not. In Egypt, the heavens run on schedule. The sun sails the manjet by day, the boat of millions of years, and by night shifts to the Mesektet, journeying through the Duat. 12 hours, 12 gates, chaos battled, and light reborn. Funerary texts lay out the route with diagrammatic precision, not metaphor, but a service manual for repeatable celestial transit. Temples echo this design in processional barks, boat-shaped shrines, carried on shoulders by trained crews, each movement rehearsed, controlled. On the Giza Plateau, a full-scale cedar vessel, disassembled and buried like a kit, lay beside the Great Pyramid for millennia. Not just symbolic, functional. Egypt didn't imagine sophisticated craft, it built them. In this logic, gods don't float as vague spirits, they commute. In India, the Ramayana tells of the Puspaka Vimana, a self-moving aerial chariot that flies wherever one wishes, ferrying a royal entourage along a return path described with clear topography. The Mahabharata deploys astra, named weapons with effects beyond metallurgy, radiance that blinds, heat that scorches life, and impact zones rendered barren. The Brahmastra's signature is recognizable even today. Elders enforce rules of engagement, and escalation is not automatic. Someone must authorize, someone must recall. These are not fables, they are systems with protocols. In Ethiopia, the Kebra Nagast doesn't relegate its sacred object to ceremony. It gives Zion, the Ark, will and velocity. In a midnight mission, doors open themselves, and fire and light accompany the object as it relocates in the twinkling of an eye. Its convoy crosses nations without fatigue. Once in Ethiopia, Zion cannot be seized. It moves only by choice. Churches preserve this legacy in the Tablet, replicas of the Ark, veiled, sealed, and touched only by priests. Exposure is not permitted. Processions are formal, choreographed, guarded. Even now, the object is treated as active force, not ornament. Among the Dogon of West Africa, the Namo, amphibious sky beings, anchor memory and time. The Sigwi, a once every 60-year ritual, tracks Sirius. 20th century debates over whether elders knew of Sirius B before Western astronomy miss the sturdier point. This culture orients itself by stars. Calendars, identities, initiation rites, all tuned to the sky's rhythm. The heavens are not backdrop, they are infrastructure. Overlay the patterns and categories emerge. Sky vehicles. Egypt's barks ferry the sun on a fixed cycle. India's vimanas fly at will, commanded and recalled. Zion travels on its own terms, independent of terrain. These are not static devices. They arrive, operate, and depart. Weapons and their governance. Astra can end a war or a world, but must be restrained by protocol. In Mesopotamia, winds and storms are weaponized, flung from chariots by divine command. The Hebrew fire and sulfur from the sky shares the same features: brief, overwhelming, final. The implication is constant. These tools exist, but someone must decide when to use them. Handling protocols. Ethiopia's Taba is seen only by the initiated, wrapped tightly, revealed briefly. Israel's ark is carried with permanent poles, its surface never touched, its approach lethal if mismanaged. Egypt's processional barks require trained ritual crews. This is not the language of story, it is the language of containment and risk. Calendars and alignments. Egypt's Amduat maps a repeatable 12-hour journey. Dogon rituals track Sirius with generational precision. Mesopotamian ziggurats align with solar and lunar paths. These aren't just agricultural tools, they are schedules for something bigger, schedules for traffic. Even the motion verbs converge. The Egyptian bark descends, rises, relaunches. India's Vimana lifts and lands where directed. Zion departs and returns with intention. Hebrew narratives assign Ruach, wind, spirit, as the force that carries, parts, moves. The tone is mechanical as much as mystical. Skeptics say symbols, boats for the sun in a river culture, flying chariots as exaggerated thrones, star rituals as farming guides. These explanations hold on the surface. The Nile taught boat logic, the monsoon taught weather reverence. Planting taught solar awareness. But when the story shifts to action, the metaphors tighten. A roar like many waters, metals gleaming, motion without turning, hovering still, operator robes with bells, so that he will not die. These aren't folk tales. They're incident reports, experiences forced into metaphor because the original words didn't exist yet. Behind each, another through line: control. In Egypt, only priests approach the bark. In Israel, only Levites approach the ark, after it's been wrapped by others. In Ethiopia, a lifelong guardian dwells with the tablet, unseen by the public. In India, elders halt overpowered weapons mid-conflict. In West Africa, the full teachings arrive only after decades. The issue isn't whether any one story is literally accurate. The issue is that across geography and generations, societies treat objects of sky-linked power as restricted tech. So what exactly is being remembered? Possibility 1. Technical contact rendered in theological terms. Machines arrived, protocols were followed, risks were real. Kings and priests knew what not to touch, what to veil, what to obey. As the operators disappeared, forms survived, meaning shifted. Possibility 2. Sophisticated human systems woven into myth. Ancient states developed logistics, optics, combustion, ritual procession, early tech at scale. What looked divine was institutional, but the machinery was real. Possibility 3. Mythic architecture built on ancestral experience. The gods flew because someone once did. The chest spoke because someone once heard. The weapons cracked the sky because memory does not easily forget awe. These lenses need not exclude one another. All three capture echoes. Vehicles indicate sovereignty. Descent means power. Protocol signals danger. Weapons enforce order. Calendars demand alignment. The metaphors work because the reference, whatever they were, left a shape. Return to the source cultures. Egypt framed the cosmos with schedules and motion. India taught that flight requires discipline. Ethiopia honored a traveling object that chooses its path. The Dogon measured life by Sirius. The Hebrew scriptures pulled the threads tight. Thrones, winds, councils, flame, precision, exclusion. And so the question returns. How did people so distant tell stories so alike? Perhaps because they didn't invent them. Perhaps because they remembered. Perhaps because something once came and left behind more than ruins. What remains now are fragments, processions that read like rollouts, sanctuaries that mirror hangars, rituals that resemble launch checklists, taboos that match radiation safety, songs that track orbits, and debates still unresolved. Who taught? Who may know how high we can build before a voice says stop? Different cultures, same memory. The pattern is not a fantasy, it's a map. And the braver question isn't whether the stories are real. It's what kind of machinery leaves this shape. Fireboats, air cars, singing chests, living calendars. Because if the ancients told the truth, the sky did not just house gods, it held traffic. First fireside stories, eyes turned upward not only to worship, but to remember. Across this investigation, a pattern refuses to sit quietly in metaphor. Machines of fire called Kavod that rise with a roar. A Ruach that hovers, parts seas, lifts prophets. An ark that speaks, shocks, and must be handled like hazardous hardware. Towers that aim at the sky and draw a response. Weapons that flatten cities and leave the land unfit. If these are only symbols, then the ancients were the most stubborn engineers of symbolism the world has known, obsessing over measurements, interfaces, and procedures no poem requires. If they are memories, the record in front of humanity is not theology first, it is operations. So the question lands without cushion. Were the elders of humanity merely poetic, or technical sky watchers writing what they saw in the only languages available? Consider evidence that does not speak in myth at all. Stone set to the sky. On a high desert plain in what is now Egypt, a ring of megaliths frames solstice sightlines. Across the sea, a ring of stones in England locks onto summer sunrise and winter sunset with a confidence that outlasts empires. In Ireland, a narrow passage and a deliberate roof box catch the sun on the darkest mornings of the year, flooding a chamber with light for minutes, then locking the door of dawn again for another cycle. In the Andes, sightlines notch sacred mountains. In Mesoamerica, entire city grids cant a precise angle from cardinal to live in relationship with the heavens. In the American Southwest, a sun dagger tracks the year across carved spirals. In Southeast Asia, a temple city breathes with solstices and equinoxes. Whatever later people said about gods and angels, the architecture is unambiguous. Deliberate alignments, repeatable events, calibration marks carved in stone. These places behave like instruments. That instrument logic matches what the texts preserve. When a narrative says an object must be covered, not looked at, carried only by trained personnel using insulating poles, and preceded by a smoke barrier so he will not die, the vocabulary is risk management, not allegory. When a prophet reports that a vehicle moved in any direction without turning, the note is not mysticism, it is a kinematic oddity an eyewitness would reach for. When creation opens not with magic words but with a hovering over floodwater, the very verb used elsewhere of an eagle stabilizing over its young, the sound is flight dynamics from a Bronze Age mouth. If encounters were logged, what kind were they? Two threads run through the oldest strata, uplift and oversight, and they refuse to splice neatly. On one side stand the teachers and givers, amphibious sages rising from water to teach writing, law, building, culture bearers bringing agriculture and calendrics, deities credited with the inventions that make cities possible: numbers, measures, record-keeping. In Mesoamerican memory, a benefactor is tied to maize, knowledge, and the measured path of Venus. In Egyptian tradition, writing is a gift. Order itself is a civilizing project. Even in the Hebrew prophets, the same presence that terrifies also instructs, mapping ethics onto a people newly free. On the other side, a colder ledger. In Mesopotamian epics, councils of higher powers debate the noise of humanity and order staged disasters, first soft, then total, to reset the board. Other tablets say plainly that humans were made to carry the yoke, a labor force to relieve divine toil. A Hebrew account remembers hybrid elites and violence filling the earth. Elsewhere, a rebel's theft of fire meets punishment, not gratitude. In this thread, knowledge is gatekept, mobility constrained, and whenever humans build too high, whether a tower with a top in the heavens or an ethical conscience that rivals the gods, someone descends and says no. Which thread is true? Possibly both. A colony needs stewards to lift it and guards to contain it. The modern world understands the impulse. Gift electricity, license it under code. Open the network, firewall the sensitive, launch rockets, regulate the airspace. The ancients may be describing exactly that. Beings not as omnipotent abstractions, but as factions with policy, some generous, some jealous. Each powerful enough that their glory left burns, shockwaves, and rules. Where does that leave the present? Hands on switches of its own. Towers rise again. Steel and composite stacks scrape the clouds and then ignite, throwing tonnage toward orbit. A dedicated military branch governs the domain the ancients called the heavens. Craft rise vertically and translate laterally. Wheels are designed to move without turning, the very motion that startled an exile by a river. The atom splits and carries knowledge to erase a city in a breath. As software begins to instruct humanity back, the old reflex returns. Write rules for orbital debris, for satellite navigation, for engines too large to fail safely, for artificial minds that may accelerate beyond comprehension. Every age that meets a new force drafts a book of Leviticus for it. Protocols, access levels, proximity warnings, do not touch, do not look equivalents. The processions that once circled a shrouded chest with bells at the hem feel less distant. So is this remembering or repeating? When towers fall and manuals burn, stories survive. A wheel inside a wheel, a chest that kills, a whirlwind that takes a man and leaves no body to bury. A pillar of fire that leads by night and hides in cloud by day. A boat that ferries the sun through danger and relaunches the world each morning. Centuries later, distance smooths them into metaphor because the nouns are gone. Yet metaphors rarely carry measurements. These do. Metaphors do not need blueprints, rings, poles, coverings, hour-by-hour maps, calibration windows, cardinal alignments. These do. None of this forces a single verdict on who the visitors were or what they wanted. Perhaps human ancients wielded forgotten crafts under the theater of temple ritual. Perhaps non-human intelligences arrived in vehicles with a plan. Uplift a little, restrain a lot, keep the colony inside its lane. Perhaps both lines braid, homegrown technology punctuated by outside interventions, memory mixing engineers with angels until categories fuse. What the pattern does force is a change in reading. If a text behaves like a manual, read it as a manual before converting it into hymns. If a ritual behaves like ground handling, ask what once required that choreography. If a story records effects modern physics can reproduce, vitrified stone, pillars of smoke, shock fronts, grant that the witnesses may have been competent. Treat the warnings accordingly, not as superstition, but as briefings. These technologies are powerful, dangerous, transformative. They bring fire and flight and forgetting. They elevate, then humble. They centralize power, then trigger interventions that scatter language, break supply chains, dissolve alliances. The arc traced across the acts, the ark's lethal proximity, the Kavod's burn and thunder, the Ruach's force and lift, the tower's suppression, the weapon's aftermath, reads like a casebook for a civilization that touched the sky, mishandled protocols, and paid. Here is the closing invitation and the caution. Ask differently. When a translation smooths a technical term into a devotional one, pause. When a commentator swaps a procedure for a parable, hold the older word in place and test how the sentence behaves. Standing inside a chamber built to catch a beam of winter sunlight like a laser, admit being inside a machine that runs on time. Watching a launch or a new engine test, feel how quickly modern rituals become liturgy, how power is wrapped in music, flags, vows. Then read the old songs again and hear how closely they resemble the rollout of something with thrust. Who were the Elohim, beings, plural, whose counsels read like governance, whose transports leave wakes in air and light, whose rules can kill the untrained? What was the ark? A device with interfaces and failure modes. What hovered over the waters? A force, perhaps a craft, stabilized over chaos to begin remediation before later storytelling labeled it spirit. What was the tower? At minimum, a ziggurat acting as a stair to the sky. At maximum, a challenge to the traffic of those who claimed the heavens as their lane. What were the weapons? Systems capable of thermal and chemical devastation beyond the metallurgy of their day, remembered in laments because survivors had no other way to keep the lesson alive. This generation is not the first to stand at a threshold with hands on powerful things, only the first to wield them planet-wide. Two gifts arrive from the ancestors: maps and warnings. The maps are cut into stone and stitched into calendars so the sky remains readable. The warnings are carved into scripture and myth so memory won't forget how quickly power outruns wisdom. Perhaps history is not a straight road, but an orbit. What was lifted falls. What was lost rises. A civilization remembers the shape of a wheel and calls it a throne, remembers the shock of a device and calls it glory, remembers a checklist and recites it as prayer. And then, when rockets throb in the night and towers glitter with telemetry, the silhouettes pressed into clay and vellum snap into focus. These accounts did not only name who came and what flew, they taught how to behave when the sky gets busy. Keep asking, keep testing, keep the old words long enough to see if they function like specifications. Verify before worship, respect before touch. If the real history of humanity is being rediscovered, it will not arrive as dogma. It will arrive like a launch window, narrow, timed, unforgiving to the unprepared. The ruins have been walked, the manuals in disguise read, and modern fire watched as it climbs. The rest depends on discipline under the heavens. This video is the result of extensive research, investigation, and reflection. Clearly, it does not close the book on a subject this important. My intent is to open space for debate, for the exchange of ideas, and for wider awareness. If this resonated with you, join the conversation, leave a comment, hit the like button, and share it with others who care about these questions. I'll see you in the next video.